Welcome to Mapping and Mobilizing Assets to Build Community. I'm your host, Andy King. Asset mapping describes the process of building an inventory of the strengths and contributions of the people who make up a community before you start any intervention. Asset mapping reveals the assets of the entire community and highlights the interconnections among them, which in turn reveals how to access those assets. It enables people to think positively about the place in which they live or work and challenges individuals to recognize how other people see and experience the same community. Asset mapping is considered the essential starting point to transforming the way that services and communities work together. It is also considered to be the first step to enabling individuals and communities to recognize what resources may be available to them. Asset mapping helps conceptualize the things that communities want to improve, whether they are physical, social, emotional, or cultural. How these assets or resources can be used may then contribute to a plan aimed at making the improvements that they have identified. No matter where you're serving as a VISTA, every community is filled with opportunities and local assets that can be harnessed to meet community needs. In this session, you'll learn how to build upon the skills of local residents, the power of associations, and the supportive functions of organizations to foster sustainable, vibrant communities. If you haven't yet had a chance to take our poll, which is on the right side of your screen, I invite you to do that now so we'll have a better sense of who's participating in today's session. I want to introduce today's team. As I mentioned, my name is Andy King. I'm a training specialist with the VISTA program, and assisting me today is Robin Stegman, a project specialist at Campaign Consultation. We're here today to assist you during the presentation and to help you get your questions answered. A quick look at today's agenda. Well, we just covered the welcome and introductions. And we're going to start the content really with an overview, a Community Asset Mapping and Mobilization 101 type of overview. Then we're going to move on and look at some of the steps that you can use to successfully conduct a community asset mapping process. Then we'll give you some ideas and show you examples of how you can put your community asset map to work. That is, once you've created it, what do you do with it? And then we'll review some resources and next steps before we take your questions. Now I'm going to turn it over to Shannon McGarry, who is a project specialist at Campaign Consultation. Shannon?
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. And I am going to take a few moments and go over some of the learning outcomes from today's session. So by the end of today's webinar, you'll be able to articulate the advantages of asset mapping, sort of the why this approach is a good one that you might consider using as part of your work. You'll be able to identify the various types of community assets that exist in your community. And you'll also have an opportunity to know how to select the appropriate methods so that you can really conduct a vibrant asset map in your community so that you can figure out how best to help the community to grow. We'll be talking about strategies that you'll be able to employ to catalyze connections, build consensus, and creatively engage diverse partners in that process, which will really help for sustainability. So we'll be talking about ways for you to create some shared vision. And finally, you'll be able to locate and access opportunities for networking and support. We have a great group of presenters with us today, the first of which is Laura Buemiller, who is the Director of Public Allies in Maryland. And she has a lot of experience conducting asset mapping, and she's a trainer and instructor at the University of Maryland School of Social Work in Baltimore. And so it's now my pleasure to turn it over to her.
Great, thanks, Shannon. So as Shannon said, my name is Laura Buemiller, and I am a proud VISTA alum, and I'm also a licensed social worker, and I'm on the faculty at the School of Social Work, where I serve as the Director of Public Allies Maryland. And Public Allies is a national AmeriCorps grantee, so I've stayed in the AmeriCorps sector for quite a while. So our niche in the AmeriCorps sector is diverse nonprofit leadership development. Our mission is to advance a new leadership to strengthen communities, nonprofits, and civic participation. So our AmeriCorps members, or allies as we call them, serve full-time in nonprofit or public agency apprenticeships. They participate in intensive leadership development training and team service projects. But more than just our ally program, Public Allies is really a national movement grounded in the conviction that everyone leads. We believe that everyone can make a difference and can work to inspire more citizens to believe in themselves, step up, and act. We run our organization and operate all of our trainings using a values-based leadership approach. One of our values is a focus on assets. And what we really mean by that is that we think that everyone has gifts and talents to contribute to their communities. And those that are often considered as clients of service programs should really be partners and leaders in addressing public issues. And that service and change efforts should be accountable to those who have to live with the results. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you today about asset mapping and building community. And I hope to provide a little bit of that 101 for you all. So I'm going to start with a poll. When you look at this glass, is it half full or half empty? So I'm hoping that poll will show up for us in a minute here. Might switch over from the questions that are up. Give it a second.
Yeah, give it 1 second. We're just waiting for the other poll to close out, and so another 10 seconds and we'll be able to start it up.
Well, my assumption is that probably half our responses are going to be half full and half of them are half empty. We can check back in a little while and see as the answers start coming in. So I'll just keep going. The truth is, this is a trick question. My perspective on this glass of water is that it's both. And, you know, I use this as an example because every individual, every community is both half full and half empty. We all have strengths and weaknesses. We all have assets and deficits. This cannot be denied. The trouble is that many professionals enter a helping relationship as I'm half full, the community where I'm working or the individuals that I'm serving are half empty, and I'm going to work with them so that my fullness fills your emptiness. And that does not engage the community in defining and solving its own problems, and what it really does is create a cycle of dependency. Social and medical research over the last probably 100 years have shown that there are a few factors that have the most far-reaching and powerful effect on the psychological, social, and physical well-being of people. These factors are based on the degree to which people feel or have a sense of community, a sense of control, adequate resources, and connections to other networks for resources in exchange. So if we aim to create change in communities, if we ignore these things and come in and help communities without allowing the community members to have that sense of control and have their own connections to resources, we're probably doing more harm than good. Okay, so let's take a look at this more closely. Many professionals use a needs-based approach to community change. And what that really means is that they're trying to create changes in the community through increased services. They're putting nonprofit organizations, for-profit hospitals, they're putting services in the community. But that means that the leaders then in the community are professional staff, people who are paid to be there. And that money is the key resource. And if the money goes away, those services go away. So if you approach community change from an asset-based lens, that means that you're changing the community through citizen involvement. And therefore, the leaders are widening circles of volunteer citizens, and that people and relationships are the key resource. So even if people move in and out of the community, if there's a large enough web and more people enter that circle of leadership, then those services, those changes are never going to go away. So an asset-based approach begins with getting to know your community. I'm going to take a step back and define community. That's one of those words that we use a lot in this work, and it can mean a lot of different things, and I'm sure all of you who are VISTAs are working with very different communities. Often, we think about a community as being place-based, people who are brought together by geographical boundaries. But communities can also be based on interest, people who share the same interest or passion. It could be a practice, it could be an action, it could be circumstance. People are brought together in lots of different ways. So it's often easiest to use examples based on place-based communities like neighborhoods. So we'll go through that for the rest of the webinar that way. But the first step in the process of you using an asset-based approach is really defining your community. So the process of getting to know your community is often referred to as community mapping or asset mapping. Don't let this confuse you. You do not need to make an actual map. This can actually be somewhat distracting if you're not working in a geographic community. So mapping really just means identifying the assets. So what are assets? What do I mean when I say the word asset? So take a look here at the screen. I know this might be a little small for you. But this shows a wheel of the community with 6 different pieces of the pie. So these are different categories of assets here. So I'm going to start in the top right. I think this is a purple piece of the pie. It says associations. And then further out next to that, there's a list of examples of associations that you might look for in your community. Things like book club or block clubs or business organizations, environmental groups. So as you're creating an asset map in your community, I would suggest that you actually write specifics. So you would say the Mount Vernon Neighborhood Association or the Sierra Club of Greater Maryland, so that you actually have specifics for those associations. The next piece of the pie there is institutions. These are things like schools and hospitals, libraries. It's really a public or a private organization devoted to the promotion of a particular cause, especially those of a public, educational, or charitable nature. So larger universities or the public library, things like that. You always want to take a look out. They might serve a wider area than just your community, but if they're based in your community, they're going to be a big player there. The next piece of the pie, I think it looks a little yellow, it's economy. So these are the assets that make the money and the resources go around. They're the for-profit businesses, they're the nonprofit organizations, they're philanthropy, different development corporations in the neighborhood. So you want to take a look at all of the businesses and economic resources that exist within your community, whether they're formal or informal. The next piece of the pie, the turquoise one as we're going around the circle, is stories. So stories is probably one of my favorite assets, and it's the hardest one to identify during asset mapping. These are things that help define the background and the history of the community that you're working in. It might be things about how the community started. It might be traditions in the community, like there's always the neighborhood where I live, which is Fells Point in Baltimore, Maryland, has the Fells Point Fun Festival every year. And it has a long tradition of pirates because back hundreds of years ago, Fells Point used to build a lot of the privateer ships for during the war for the United States. And so we have this history of pirates, and that really kind of defines our neighborhood and unites the people and helps people feel connected to the neighborhood. So often there's stories like that that help you understand the community where you're working. The next category of assets on the wheel is physical. This is on the far left. So these are the physical spaces where people can come together, where people can meet. So gardens and parks, playgrounds, different types of housing or streets that are important landmarks for your neighborhood. And remember that everything is an asset, even vacant lots or buildings. You never know if that vacant lot could be turned into a community garden for your project. So make sure that you're keeping track of everything that you come across that could be useful for your project. And then the last category of assets up here in the top left, I think it's like a pinky orange, is individuals. So this is actually where you just list the individuals that you've come across in your work. I would suggest that you write down specific names and even include their contact information here so you have it all stored in the same place. So this is like Principal Brown from the elementary school, or maybe it's Susan, who's the president of the neighborhood association. So you want to keep track of the people that you build relationships with, and you can use this as brainstorming when you're trying to create your project. So I do want to make a note that some of your organizations or assets, some of your items or people might be listed under more than one category, and that's okay. Your elementary school in your neighborhood is for sure an institution, but it's also a physical space if you need to hold meetings in the cafeteria. So, try and think creatively about the assets that you're identifying as you're figuring out what role they play in the community. So the next question is, how do we find these assets in a community? And I'm going to come back to the difference between a needs-based and asset-based approach here to really hit home on this point. It's hard to find assets if you are looking for ways to help. If you're looking for ways to help, that usually points you towards needs in the community. I share this one example of a needs survey and a gift survey on your screen as a way to collect information, or this is a tool that you could use to collect information. And I'm sharing this particular one to highlight the fact that your entire approach must be grounded with a focus on assets, and really a belief that diversity and inclusion are important for community health. And I just want to note that there are many tools available, not just these two sample surveys. There are many tools available that you can use to help collect information, and we will get to that a little later on in the presentation. So looking at your screen, this needs survey, this is an abbreviated version obviously, but I have seen these actual questions in a Department of Social Services benefits interview. These are questions about what people lack. Do they lack adequate housing? Are you in need of a high school diploma? Do you not have the job skills you need? Or, they ask, do you have, about negative questions, do you have a criminal record? Do you have a history of drug abuse? And these questions help you find needs, deficits, areas where people are lacking, areas where you could bring services in to fix their problems for them. So now, we don't want to ignore that people have needs. Trust me, those needs will become obvious to you as you work in a community. But by asking about needs, we position ourselves as the answer or as the solution to those needs. In order to create a truly healthy, independent, self-sufficient community, assets need to be identified and mobilized so that people have control, have a network to turn to, and do not become dependent on a system. So here's an example, the gift survey here is an example of how to find assets. You can ask about the gifts that people have. What positive qualities do people say you have? Who are the people in your life that you give to, and how do you give to them? Or what do you give that makes you feel good? Questions like that. You can ask questions or ask people about their skills. What do you like to do that people would pay you to do? Have you ever made anything? Have you ever fixed anything? What do you enjoy doing? And then lastly, you could ask questions about dreams. This is things that don't yet exist in the community, but might. If you could snap your fingers and be doing anything, what would it be? What are your goals for this community? What would you like to see happen? And even a question like that might show you what's lacking in the community, but it will also show you what's possible, and it will help motivate people to bring about that change themselves. So to put this all back into context for you, there are 5 steps of the ABCD process. I'm referring to ABCD stands for Asset-Based Community Development, and these process really comes out of the ABCD Institute at Northwestern University, and that will show up as a resource later on in the PowerPoint. We'll give you some links. So there are 5 steps that they refer to. The first is mapping the community, which we just talked about. The second is building relationships. So that's getting to know the individuals there, establishing trust. The third step is to mobilize the community for growth and information sharing. So that's connecting community members to each other, connecting those assets to each other so that they can start working together and build their networks. The fourth is to bring together the community to develop a shared vision and plan. This is about their dream, right? So getting the whole community on board and identifying the dream that they want to bring to life. And then last is leverage resources to support the community's development. You know, there is a possibility that you bring in outside resources, but it's best to start with the resources or the assets that are inside the community first. So recognize that these steps are not linear steps, but all 5 do need to happen to be successful. You might have to go back and work on earlier steps, or maybe you're working on multiple steps at the same time. For example, sometimes it's hard to learn the stories and identify the individuals if you haven't built relationships yet. So you know, you might work on these different things at different times. So, in as quickly as I could, and what was that, about 15 minutes, that was an asset map overview. It looks like our polls come in. 85% of you do view the glass as half full, so we've got a lot of optimists in the crowd here, which is really nice. Hopefully this asset-based approach is ringing true with you. So I think that's the end for me. I think we are going to open it up for questions. Is that right?
That is right. It looks like one question that we have is that is a asset-based mapping approach best utilized when financial resources are somewhat available in the community versus a needs approach?
You know, I think that an asset-based approach is almost always preferred over a needs-based approach. I think that even when financial resources are scarce, that is a reason, you know, you can sell that to funders and try and bring services in. But you know, more than likely those resources are going to run out at some point. So you want to make sure that you're having this asset-based approach to community development so that you can leverage the resources that exist, even if they're not financial, to start solving the community's problems for itself.
Great. One minute, I think we have one more coming in. Can you give us a real-life example of how this process has worked for you?
Well, I think that the next couple of presenters are going to do that and much more in depth than I will. I'll give a very quick example. I had a team of AmeriCorps members a couple of years ago who wanted to work in a community where they were working at a nonprofit there and had this blank wall space. And the team just got really excited, wanted to paint a mural on the wall, decided what was best for the community, and went ahead and painted it. And 2 days later, it was covered in graffiti. And they realized that the community didn't own this mural. They had no idea what it was. They didn't care about it, and therefore they vandalized it. So they actually went through a process of pulling all the neighborhood kids together. They had a focus group over several months, and they asked the community what they wanted to do with the wall space there at the building that used to be an eyesore. And then they got the kids involved, and the kids painted a picture of the community. So it was their representation of who they were and who they wanted to be. And that was 5 years ago, and that mural still is there.
Great. And we have one more question before we move on. Are there nationally based asset mapping surveys you can refer us to use for asset building research?
Sure. So if you go to the ABCD Institute website, which I think we'll put up at the end here, there's a couple different links within their website. It has tools and resources. They have a textbook written by John McKnight and Jody Kurtzman that has multiple examples of surveys that you can use. So in addition to ABCD, there's also a school of thought called appreciative inquiry. This actually comes from comes from organizational development, really, but the Peace Corps has an adaptation to apply appreciative inquiry to community development. And so if you Google appreciative inquiry, you'll also find samples of questions that are appreciative.
Great. All right. I will pass it back over to Shannon.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura and Robin. So now that we've had a good overview and an introduction about what asset mapping and mobilization is, we're going to really dive into the nuts and bolts and the considerations for asset mapping so that we can really determine what the steps are and help you figure out how to go through that process. And so there are several different steps for asset mapping. And these steps involve both setting up the infrastructure to manage and maintain the asset mapping process, as well as doing the actual work of mapping the assets. And so really it's important that you're gathering together a local group of people that you can lean on to help organize the community approach and also to provide leadership for follow-up and to make sure that the work that you're doing is sustainable moving forward. Really, what you need to consider first is determining what your purpose is. The second you're going to need to do is to build your infrastructure, and then think about what assets you're going to be identifying and inventorying. Finally, really what the map is, so that's about building the relationships and drawing the connections between assets and the individuals that are involved. And then finally, how you're going to put that the assets to work and utilize those so that you can really advance your projects and build the community. So the first thing that you're really going to want to do is to identify why it is that you're doing an asset map and develop a purpose goal for your mapping project. You'll need to be able to define what you want to do with the information that you're collecting, and this is where you can start to think about what some of your measures of success are going to be. So you'll need to be able to define, for example, it might be that by May 1st, we will connect with 25 neighborhood associations and develop a formal structure for participation in youth development activities. It's important to keep in mind that your mapping goal is different than the overarching goal of the project in which you will be using the asset mapping information. So your mapping goal will really focus on connecting with people that you want to involve with the implementation of your overarching goal. So start with what will be the end of your statement, and then name the focus or activity that other people and associations will be able to help to implement. And then you're going to want to choose what will be done about your focus. So are you hoping to develop something, to improve, to enhance? You want to consider some of the answering the questions: who are you seeking to involve? How many people do you need to help you to achieve your goals? And what is it that you're asking people to do? You want to make sure that you're choosing an end date for your mapping project, so a scheduled timeline is always good. For ease, I recommend using a time period that would begin within 12 months, because that provides some flexibility. And remember that you want to have a goal in mind about what you're going to do with the information that you collect. So keeping in mind, are you going to be creating a community resource guide? Are you hoping to develop a searchable database of different community resources that you can tap for future initiatives? Perhaps you're trying to link individuals with paid or volunteer opportunities, or possibly link your communities to future opportunities. So given all of those tips, are there particular mapping goals that you might develop? There'll be a prompt in the chat that's coming up shortly, and so go ahead and share any mapping goals that you might have in the chat feature. Once you've determined your purpose and really set your goals, you're going to want to move to building the infrastructure. Thinking about sort of anything, you need some strategy and a plan to make sure that it is successful. So some things that you might want to consider: who's going to be responsible for managing the process? Is it going to be you, somebody else in the organization? Who's going to be directing the engagement process once the mapping is complete? So sort of what's the follow-up plan? Again, defining your community, so what's the geographic focus? Do you need to have addresses, zip codes? What are those boundaries? Who is going to be part of your advisory group? Do you need additional funds? Is there a plan for storing the data? So these are just some of the things that you want to kind of keep in mind as you're getting started. The next thing, once you have your infrastructure in place and you've defined your community and figured out what your goal is for your asset map, you're ready to start the process of identifying and inventorying the assets. And we've already talked a little bit about what those assets are. So think about what it is that you need specifically in order to make your project a success. As we've mentioned before, it's really not a linear set of operations that you can easily scale up or roll out. Really, it's about engaging and building relationships so that you're able to enable strengths, capacities, and abilities to be identified and developed for positive outcomes. And so there's lots of different methods that you can employ to support the identification and collections of assets. And you just want to make sure that you're including both the tangible, such as your physical assets, parks, community centers, and churches, as well as those that are intangible, so experiences, skills, knowledge, and passion. It's more than just about gathering data. It's about making sure that you're promoting new connections, new relationships, and new possibilities. And so now I'm going to introduce Toria Schrayer, who is a VISTA with the Greater Homeward Community Corporation, and she works as a parent organizer at a local public school in Baltimore, Maryland. And she has just gotten started with the asset mapping process and is going to share a little bit about her experience with identifying and inventorying assets. So I'm going to turn it over to Toria.
Thank you, Shannon. So like Shannon said, I'm working at a local community-based organization working with parents and families and the administration of the local public school to try to work on a lot of resources and parent engagement in the school, getting parents involved and active in the school. So where this comes in with the asset map is looking at the local community and what it has to offer to both the local community to the school and the school to the community, building the bridges between them. There are a lot of really wonderful assets in the community that may not be obvious if you don't start looking for them. There are local businesses and churches, people who are very dedicated to making spaces and resources for families, art, all kinds of things. You see some pictures that I've collected through my process on the screen now. So like I said, a great deal of my time has been spent with this project. The goals were to create bridges between the school and the local community in both directions, finding out how the school could be a resource for the community and the community a resource for the school. And again, that's with the end goal of creating a resource guide for families of the school. It's also a great way to get these folks involved in the school, to engage neighborhoods that are in the catchment area that may not have been as involved and engaged previously. And that had some of its own challenges that I'll talk about in a minute, but it also has a lot of rewards as it comes together. So like I said, there are a lot of assets in community, and the very first thing that I had to start thinking about was, all right, there we are, right slide now. The first thing that I had to start thinking about was who to involve in the process. And so the obvious answer are folks who are involved in the school already, so that's parents, administrators in the school, staff, teachers, anyone who's already in the building, volunteers. But because of the connection between the school and the community, I also am involving parents whose children are not at the school, and folks in the community who don't have parents, artists in the community, local businesses and churches, so the folks who run the gardens and have art installments, people who are in the community doing things. And so it sort of spirals out because at the end of each conversation that you can have with someone in the community, it's very simple to say, hey, you know, while I'm doing this project, who else should I speak to? And everyone has an answer of someone that they think you should talk to next. Everyone knows someone, and that goes back to connections between people and mapping people as assets. And they'll be able to tell you, you know, quickly what that person can do to help. So I hope that helps with the whole starting the process. But of course, it can be a challenging process. So there's a lot with striking a balance between the time that you spend on it and the information that you're getting. So it takes a long time to have in-depth conversations with people. And the in-depth conversations are really where you get the bulk of your information. And they can be incredibly helpful. It does, though, take a long time to get that information. It can be very frustrating when you schedule meetings and folks, for whatever reason, are not able to keep your meeting. And there's not always a lot you can do about that. At some point, I started doing phone meetings as well, which did help. Although, again, that goes back to that balance of in-depth versus time commitment. And something that I thought one of you had a question about earlier about keeping individuals positive and hopeful, and this goes back to balancing needs and assets. A lot of times people will walk into, you know, if you ask someone to meet with you to talk about resources in the community, they'll go in sometimes saying, oh, there's nothing here and things are terrible. And that's where questions like, what do you hope for the future? Or if you had unlimited resources, what would you do with that? What would you like to see in the community? And oftentimes you'll find out, well, there's this really wonderful space, it's just that there's no programming. Or there's, you know, these people doing this really exciting things, but they don't have funding. And what can come out of that are these resources that are there, they are assets, but people sometimes don't have as much perspective maybe on how that's actually a good thing. So it has been a successful process. I found new ways to engage populations who have not been in the school. An artist from the community who had never set foot into the school is, you know, starting up as a volunteer there and is interested in bringing in art programming at no cost to the school. So there are a lot of really exciting things that are coming from that. One of the things that I found to be most helpful was staying flexible and redefining like my surveys and questions very early on. When I first started, I was asking specifically about resources for families, and I found that that limited me to only a small amount of resources in the community where really there are spaces that are being used by family groups and by people in families that I was not being told about when I only asked about family assets. You know, so sort of I would be as broad as possible and keep narrowing down, but leave yourself out at the beginning. And it's amazing the connections and resources that that were less obvious in the community, and how those sort of came out and are now available for our resource guide. So that's a little bit about my process. There you go. And the lessons that I learned most from this that I'd love to share with you today are that resources and assets exist in every community. They're there even if you don't see them. People's needs are going to be met. They are being met currently. It's just how they're being met. There may be things that need to change, absolutely, but there are things that are helping people to get by, to get what they need. There are assets there. All you have to do is find out what people are passionate about, what they're doing, and to start looking into those things. It may not be a formal you know, it may not be a formal library, but there might be someone who has a lot of books and is, you know, letting people borrow them, or it might be someone who doesn't have a formal daycare center, but is always, you know, babysitting a few kids. Whatever it is, there are always resources in the community, and people's needs are being met. Everyone is passionate about something. If you find out what matters to them, that's what they share, that's what they can bring to you, and that's what they can use to help get other people involved and engaged. So I hope that helps, and good luck on your projects as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Toria. That was really helpful and sort of gave a different perspective. And so, you know, how do you go about identifying those assets, and how are you going to be having those conversations with people so that you can really get to the nuts and bolts of what their dreams and hopes are for the community and what they can bring to the table. And there are lots of different strategies that you can employ, and really you want to make sure that you're choosing the right strategy for the task that's in front of you, and that's sort of what our Donald Duck lookalike is looking to do, is he's trying to figure out what to do with that, what could be a fax machine. And so most communities, one place to start is really to look at some of the previous work that your community may have done, some of the old processes or activities that might have included things like community planning or economic development, program and service development. So what other community asset maps have been done in the past? So, you know, what worked and what didn't work. There's often something that's happened in your community that you can draw upon to get some of that historical perspective. And so, you know, you might want to think about how you can find that information. So once you've established what's already been done, you can start to talk to colleagues in your organization to identify individuals or associations and institutions that you're already working with, and those that might be good to establish relationships with. You can review public sources such as newsletters, newspapers, and bulletin boards for directories. Google search is a great tool to employ. Don't forget Google Maps, which can kind of pinpoint areas that are within your defined community and showcase what's there. You can do a quick walkthrough of your neighborhood, speak with people door to door, so doing a canvas type situation. That's a great way to have build relationships and discover some of those hidden assets. You can schedule interviews with leaders of associations and institutions, find out what community groups are meeting and who are activists within the neighborhood and community, and you can have sit-down conversations with them. So if there's something going on at a local library or a local cafe or bar, those are some great places to have some good informal conversations. And then also, while telephone surveys might not be as popular as they used to be, you can always look at community listservs or doing some texting campaigns to kind of identify some additional hidden gems. So in the prompt, go ahead and share any other ideas that you might have. And what we're going to move to now is sort of putting it all together and how you can really once you've identified and inventoried all of your assets, how do you draw the connections and links to start to build relationships between the individuals, associations, and institutions that you've uncovered in the community? So maps are a great visual aid, but that's only one way. There are also strategic connections charts, and so what we're going to do now is sort of turn it over to do a quick community activity here with a whiteboard so that we can think about the different types of possibilities that there are for relationships and partnerships to help us to meet our community goals. So I'm going to turn it over to Robin, who's going to take us quickly through a process.
Great, thanks, Shannon. And I'm pulling up, you should see now, a look at some strategic connections. So at the center is you and your organization and some other places like local residents and schools. So what I'm going to kind of look from the chat here to build our asset map. So if you can put what is one kind of institution in your organization that might be a asset that you want to connect with? All right, so I see the example is churches. I see people are talking about the military or veterans. Right. Veterans. A community center. What? Community center. All right, so take these examples, and what are some ways, enter into the chat now, what are some ways that you could connect with, let's take for the example, military and veterans. What are some ways that connecting with them might help your organization? Okay, so I see here if you're trying to recruit volunteers. employ them. It can help recruit other community members, help with training, that's a great one, leadership training or other training from their service. All right, so you start to get an example of how you can begin to build that map that might not be a physical map, but show the different strategic connections you can make around different assets that you've identified in your community. So I'm going to go back and turn it over to Leah. Leah, are you with us?
All right, here I am. Sorry.
Oh, great. No worries.
Hi, my name is Leah Brow, and I'm currently serving as a VISTA leader. I've served 2 terms in Cleveland, Ohio. My first term was with the Cleveland Food Bank, working on SNAP expansion and enrollment, SNAP formally or informally known as food stamps. And then my second term has been with Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry, working with our men's shelter and developing job training programs through small social enterprise businesses. And in both of these terms, I've really had to utilize the community around me to really promote my programs. With the food stamp enrollment, it was just getting access out to everyone and finding all of the potential clients and people eligible. And with my second term, developing businesses, I mean, they're very dependent on the community for customers and our products to be used and our revenue streams and pretty much every piece of our business. So one of the tools that my current director has really utilized in this term that has been helpful for kind of developing these asset maps is the SWOT analysis. So 4 things you're trying to kind of identify. Once you have your goal in mind, you want to really look at what your strengths, weaknesses, looks like it flipped back, what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the, your end goal, what you're trying to accomplish are. So our first social enterprise in my second term as a leader, we have a business that manufactures and installs utilitarian-style bike racks in Cleveland. So our strengths, we got our initial funding because there was no local competition. Nobody else was making the products that we were making in Cleveland. So that was great. We didn't really have to worry about, being competitive with a lot of other very similar products. It's also, Cleveland's has been embracing green transportation and things like that, and it's definitely a well-received idea, bike transportation in general. So we knew that going forward with a bike-friendly business would be generally a strong point in such a progressive city. Weaknesses would be just that there's some community members wouldn't want to invest in this sort of thing. Also, not everyone needs a bike rack. Our major competition when we started was trees and poles and other things that people could secure their bikes to, but ours, our customers aren't going to be buying the bike racks. It's going to be businesses that want to attract bike customers. So looking at a diagram like this, it really helped us figure out who we should be trying to connect with to get our bike racks to be sold. Opportunities from there, we reached out to cyclist organizations, people who would want there to be more safe places for cyclists to park their bikes. We reached out to businesses that had a lot of cyclist customers and would be looking to draw more in. And we even wound up partnering with some people that were in need of getting up to code with new bike parking regulations and stuff like this. So we tried to really hone in on who would be interested in our product and what we were trying to do, so we wouldn't be spending a lot of time reaching out to people that might not really have any interest at all in working with us. And then threats, we're always afraid of reaching maximum saturation. We're in a large city, but it's not so big that we can just continue making the same bike rack without changing our product. So we always sort of have to be aware of you know, our new expansion and going into different cities, or how we can really keep growing and be sustainable in the future. So, you know, looking at this, those were the examples for just my the current project of the bike rack business, but this sort of thing can really help you identify those relationships worth pursuing. So in the next step, where do you start with this sort of stuff? I found really good luck in both my terms, starting with my host site. To go back to an example from my first term, I was working with the Cleveland Food Bank, and they have hundreds of food pantries that do feeding programs with them. I started meeting with the people who worked and managed those agencies one-on-one, just to see, you know, what their client base looked like. Was it mostly families? Was it mostly single people? I was trying to get a feel for, you know, the people who were 130% below the federal income guidelines, under the federal poverty income guidelines. Those were the people that were eligible for my program. So I was trying to find out where they would be, who has access to them or interacts with them, and who could help them sign up for this program. So they were all very helpful, and to echo something that Toria said during her piece, every person I talked to was eager to tell me the next place to look, or the next person to talk to, and the next, you know, connection to grow from. And so, you know, the host site was great because I was a new VISTA, just out of college, and my supervisor and my coworkers already had a lot of connections for people that already had that strength, the initial interest to engage with me, and connections to people I was looking to reach. So after I developed a lot of networking opportunities from talking to all these, you know, contacts from my host site, I started going to networking events and just being very public about what I was doing and what my project was, and I found that a lot of people were willing to come to me and ask me more questions. I try to find what the strengths for the community are in my program and project them out. And chances are there are other people that are trying to do this very same thing. They have a similar end goal, and they're looking for people to work with to, you know, make their project happen too. So if you've got a project where there might be a lot of shared interest in your community, you talk about it, probably people will want to engage with you back. And the third big tip I have is knowing your neighbors. In my term now as a VISTA leader, I've gotten a lot of larger events that have started off a little shaky, but gained strength by reaching out to neighbors just around my organization. We did a large neighborhood cleanup day and just went out to inform businesses and all kinds of organizations and groups around us of just what we were doing, and we got so much support and donations for supplies and all kinds of stuff, just because those people, even though they weren't social service organizations or doing exactly the same sorts of things we were, they had that shared interest because they were in the same area. And the last thing, just record everything, write it down. I've been trying through my term just to keep this as easily recorded for the people that are going to be, you know, coming after me and so on. So just make sure you write everything down, because the next VISTAs will love those resources that you've collected during your term. So that's all I've got for my tips for asset mapping. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope you all have great luck developing your own asset maps of your own.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. Those are some really great points about, you know, establishing the relationships and building connections to make your asset maps more powerful, and really to leverage those assets in the community so that you can advance your projects. Now I'm going to turn it over to Asma Peracha, who is another VISTA leader, and she's going to share a little bit with us about her experience, but then also how she's planning to leverage and utilize those resources as part of her project within Michigan Gear Up. So I'm going to turn it over to Asma. Asma, are you there?
Yes, so thank you for the introduction. As you said, my name is Asma and I work out of Detroit, Michigan with Michigan's Being Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs, also known as MyGear Up. And Gear Up is, just to tell you a little bit about our program before we jump into the asset mapping project. Gear Up is a federal grant offered through the U.S. Department of Education, and the state of Michigan won its third Gear Up grant in 2011. It's a $23 million grant matched by state and local funds, and the Gear Up model is to follow a cohort. So we follow a cohort of students starting from 7th grade through their first year of college. And our cohort will be starting high school in just a few weeks this fall, so this is an exciting time. And My Gear Up aims to provide college access programming to increase the number of low-income students who are prepared to enter into and succeed in post-secondary education as well as the workforce. And as you can probably guess, this is a really large task, so we partner with all 15 of our public universities to provide the college access programming that is needed to make this happen. Our university partners serve feeder schools in their area to provide services including tutoring, mentoring, college visits and camps, STEM exposure, and financial literacy. And one of the really great things, or I should say one of the many great things about My Gear Up is that there is a state office. And so the office has the ability to kind of work centrally and coordinate statewide collaboration and initiatives. And this summer, because we had 10 summer associates from AmeriCorps as well as our usual 14 AmeriCorps VISTAs, we decided that one of those statewide initiatives we wanted to organize was our asset mapping project. And to give you a little bit of background about our project, it really started when one of our 15 university partners, the University of Michigan Ann Arbor, their former VISTA Tolulope audit wall was given the assignment by her supervisor, Dr. Loomis Hilaire, of creating an asset map for the Southfield community that the U of M My Gear Up program works with. And totally started where I'm sure many of you listening are today, where she knew very little about asset maps and how to create one or how to use one once you created it. And hopefully, like you, she was a quick learner, so she did a lot of research and she eventually created a really, really impressive asset map. Not only did she list the assets in the community, but she also included demographics of the student population she was working with, as well as stated goals and values and a mission statement. And in fact, her project was so impressive that My Gear Up decided we need to really take this and implement it on a statewide level. So we had Tolu come in and train the rest of the My Gear Up AmeriCorps team, our VISTAs and summer associates, and how to create an asset map. And the My Gear Up AmeriCorps team has been working on maps for their local communities throughout the summer. And the idea is that when you take all of these different asset maps for the local communities and you put them together, you have a statewide map. And I've told you a little bit, that was a little bit about what we did, and I wanted to share with you also why and how we hope to use our asset maps. So as you can see by looking at this map, My Gear Up is a truly statewide program, and this map shows all of our university partners. And like I said, each partner serves local feeder schools in their area. And this model is very effective because each university partner can really tailor their My Gear programming to the needs of their local cohort and their local community. But what we want to do in addition to this individualized programming is ensure that there is a certain level of continuity in our My Gear Up sites throughout the state in terms of the services that they offer. So this is like the My Gear Up student moves from one area to another. They can find similar services in the My Gear Up programs in both areas. And just because the student has moved, they don't lose access to those My Gear Up services. So the goal with our asset map is to organize the map by the services that are considered the core of MyGearUp. And if there is a service that is not currently offered by MyGearUp site, they can look at their map and see how to best address this issue. For example, if a MyGearUp site does not currently offer tutoring for its students, their asset map can help them find local resources that do offer tutoring, or can help find resources that would facilitate them providing tutoring. And they can also cross-reference the statewide map to improve current services. For example, if one of our universities, let's say Michigan State University, offers a really great and a really thorough tutoring program, and one of the other universities has room to grow in that service, they can look at the asset map from Michigan State and see what are the resources that the MyGearUp program at Michigan State is using to provide tutoring. There's something similar in our area that we can also use. And this will really take these already strong individual MyGearUp programs and just build and improve the current programming efforts. And to conclude, I wanted to share one of our promising practices for going through this asset map project. So one thing we do through our internal evaluation team is send out a list of definitions for MyGearUp services to all of our university partners. And for example, when we say MyGearUp provides tutoring, what does tutoring mean? Or what does financial literacy mean? Or what do parent services mean? What does that consist of? And this is crucial for everyone to have a similar definition of the services that the asset maps are looking at. And I would really encourage anyone who's creating an asset map to create this list of definitions that will be important for everyone to be on the same page before they create or they attempt to use an asset map. So thank you for listening, and I hope that gives you a brief overview of what MyGearUp has done with asset mapping at a statewide level, as well as why and how. And if there's time, I think we'll take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Asma. Before we open up for questions, I'm just going to quickly wrap us up. You know, what's really important and what we want to emphasize today is not only that you want to begin to map the assets in your community and really draw those strategic connections between the individual's resources and organizations, but then also, you know, how do you put that to work so that you're able to leverage those resources to support your community projects. And so you can do that through creating sort of a shared vision and plan and setting goals and tracking the successes so that you're making sure that those relationships and that those connections aren't going to waste, and that can really sort of help you figure out which conversations that you need to be having and with whom it makes sense to be having those conversations, and to really help to keep people engaged. And so as you're going through, you can think about how you can use those to help fund your proposals, connect individuals to different types of volunteered or paid opportunities, and then also create some databases of resources that are available. And so, you know, next what we'll be doing is after today's session, there are a lot of great resources that can help you to conduct your community asset mapping sessions, to really plan and strategize around those, and then also some tools that will help you to mobilize those assets. And so after the session, we'll be sharing some steps and strategies worksheets, a couple of different inventory worksheets that you can begin to fill out, a tips and best practices guide on community asset mapping sessions, so how you might want to create those shared visioning sessions, and then also a guide on best practices for how to utilize assets. If you visit the VISTA campus, you can also, you'll find the VISTA notebook that has some information, and then also the ABCD Institute at Northwestern University, which the link is there, and also the Appreciative Inquiry form, which Laura was talking about earlier in the session. So all of those resources will be mailed to you. And we definitely want to leave you with some next steps. So if you want to go off, you can start to develop your mapping goal and asset mapping plan. Visit the resource sites and start utilizing the tools and worksheets so that you can really develop your projects. And we are hoping that people can sort of use today's session as a launching point to start your mapping process. And so we're hoping that we'll share your successes and track your projects using the VISTA Campus forums. And then finally, on September 9th, we're going to do a follow-up webinar and call so that we can recap some of the tips and strategies that we reviewed today, and then answer questions that you might have as you're going through the asset mapping process. So please mark that on your calendars so that we can get that going. And thank you, everybody. What we're going to do now is we're going to pause and open up the lines for some questions. It looks like there's been a couple of really great questions that have been asked in the Q&A feature, so you can go ahead and continue to ask them there. But Gwen, if you can open up the lines and tell us how to do that, that would be great.
Thank you. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1. Please record your first and last name when prompted. To withdraw your request, press *2. Once again, to ask a question, please press *1. One moment.
Great. And while we are waiting for those questions to come in, I'm going to ask a couple of questions that have come in from the Q&A for all of our panelists today. So the first question I have is, what are mistakes that you see eager young VISTAs making in this process?
Laura, do you want to take that one?
Sure. You know, I think the thing that I see is just people racing in and being so excited to help and starting to talk to people and get to know the residents that they just get excited and they come up with an idea that they've heard and just want to start implementing it right away. And, you know, it's this eagerness, it's this passion that I see in a lot of young VISTAs, and it's great, and I don't want to tamper that down. But what ends up happening is you start doing work for the community instead of with the community. So I always urge the young AmeriCorps members to just take your time. There's nothing quick about this process. You've got to get to know the community first and engage them and empower them to do the ideas for themselves instead of doing for.
Great, thank you. And do we have questions through the phone line?
Your first question comes from, I believe, Paul Muck. Your line is open.
Hi, I had a question about like doing a community profile. I wanted to know whether you thought you could do both needs and assets together to understand the community more holistically, especially if you're trying to help your organization plan future outreach to an area.
Sure thing. Yeah, this is Laura. I'll tackle that one again. I think that, you know, that's why I started with the glasses both half full and half empty. It's hard to deny that needs exist, you know, and you don't want to ignore that because, you know, I think they will impact your ability to make change in that community. So I think, you know, remembering and keeping track of the needs that you do see or the things that you hear is not, you know, off limits. I think you should keep track of what you hear. But the real point of an asset-based approach is to make sure that you're starting with what exists in the community and figuring out a way that the community's own assets make up for those needs. And so I think this gets confusing because when you look at things in a community, it's not a black and white, this is either a need or this is an asset. It's just a way of looking at the community. Remember the example I gave about a vacant lot, right? So if somebody comes in with a needs-based approach, you look at that vacant lot and say, this thing needs to be cleaned up. I need to get my corps of volunteers from across town to come in and just clean up this community or clean up this vacant lot. So that's a needs-based approach. But when you're looking at the vacant lot from an asset-based approach, you're saying, what could happen here? You go next door and you ask the person who lives right next door to the vacant lot, what are your dreams for this vacant lot? What do you want to see happen here? So it's not a black and white of you can't put needs or eyesores or problems on the asset map. It's the lens with which you view the things that exist in this community. I hope that helps, and I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Do we have another question via the phone?
Your next question comes from Kathleen Johnston.
Hi. Yeah. So my question is, how would you recommend presenting yourself to assets that you find in the community? So say you're looking to find some of the institutions and just sort of introduce the program and the VISTA program in your organization. Do you recommend sort of having a tentative idea of the vision where you want this to go? Like, I eventually want a community-wide network that will, on its own, promote access to public benefits. But right at the beginning, I don't have a completely cohesive view of how all these different assets work together if I don't even know what all the different assets are. So what do you suggest as like an introduction of letting, when you're having these meetings with people for the first time?
This is Laura. Does anyone else want to tackle that?
Complex.
That's a really good question. I think it's a multiple part question, so I might have a multiple part answer here. The first thing I would think about is why you want to create a network of for people to access benefits, and really double check if that's exactly what this community needs. So I would, really take that step back and start asking around, doing your asset map to make sure that that's the right answer for this community. Now, there are a lot of times when we are paid professionals that will be tasked with a specific community organizing objective. So if that's the objective of your organization, I can definitely understand why you need to work that way. So then, in presenting yourself, make sure that you have as open mind as possible. There's a lot of different ways to find those assets. It can be as simple as just doing a Google search and using the internet, using the library, seeing what you can find and read and look up about the community. But really, you're going to be most successful if you spend time there. So it's doing a driving tour, it's doing a walking tour, it's asking, maybe the police officer or the mayor's office of neighborhoods representative, whoever it is, a neighborhood association member, to give you a tour and to point things out to you and tell you about how things work. I always say, with every person you meet, ask them who else they can introduce you to. I can't remember, one of the VISTAs was saying that there's always a snowball effect with that. So as you're introducing yourself, say, I'm a member of this community and I've noticed that residents would like to have better access to benefits, and I'm trying to figure out how we can create a system here that would help do that.
This is Leah Brow. I think I might have a little bit of advice for benefit access, particularly when I did that in Cleveland. I tried to really look at who else would benefit from there being increased access to public benefits, because it is something that some people do just have a negative view of. And through my term, I just realized that interacting with people that are not open to that sort of thing, it's draining on both people's time a lot of the times. But I started seeing, who would benefit from there being more food stamp usage in Cleveland. The grocery stores would. So would the farmers markets, because the Cleveland farmers markets take the SNAP credits as well. So I started interacting with people that would actually be getting more customers and more money from there being more people with that money to spend on food in particular. And those conversations tended to be a lot more pleasant. And if I could find a way that what I was doing would benefit them too, they would usually listen to me and be a lot friendlier and a lot more helpful about that kind of stuff.
Awesome, thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, I have a question from Elise Miller. What metrics do you use to measure success in asset mapping?
And this is Shannon, and I can take that one. And so really what you want to think of when you're thinking of the actual creation of your asset map is thinking of it more in terms of being an output. and sort of a tool that will help you to get to the outcome. So you might be looking to see what the connections are, but really the measure of success would be the number of new relationships that were built, or how you were able to leverage those resources and the assets and connections that you have to, say, get more funding for your programs, or to recruit more volunteers. And so really thinking about how it can be used as a tool to help you meet your larger project goals. And hopefully that will help to answer that question.
Great, thank you. And another question is, so One VISTA has a particular problem where they're looking for funding for a senior citizen apartment building, but they haven't been able to get grants or loans. What are some specific assets that he might look for in this community that could help him, be able to get that project off the ground?
This is Toria. I can help to answer that. I think that maybe, of course, funding is important, but there's probably a lot that you can do in your community without funding in a traditional sense. So there are probably people who would be willing to help teens. There might be someone, I know about a VISTA here in Baltimore City who was able to get space donated for a homeless shelter. So she was able to start that program for free. So space, volunteers to teens. You could approach businesses who deal in construction equipment and similar things to try to get, windows or whatever it is that you need. There are a lot of resources that, while of course you might immediately think of money and grants, it might be just as valuable to try to fit together the pieces. Of course, in some ways that can take more time, but in a lot of ways it can also save you and your program a huge amount of hassle and not being able to get the funding. I hope that answered your question.
I'll add to that. This is Laura. If that's okay, I'm going to add to that. I think that's a great response, and you should always start there. And then you should also think about looking for money from non-traditional sources. There's only a limited amount of foundations and grants to go around, so sometimes that's complicated. So thinking about that economic category on your asset map, really go to the places in the community where this might impact them. As we just discussed. So maybe going to the hospital and saying, if we build a senior home, the seniors won't have to go to your hospital as much. So maybe get a donation from them, get a donation from the local businesses, get a location or donations from the local sororities and things like that. So non-traditional places for funding.
Okay, thank you. We can take another question from the line.
Your next question comes from, I believe, Perry Goldnick. Your line is open.
Hello, yes. That was my question, was the last one. A couple quick comments. I'm all for self-sufficient communities. Gandhi had great ideas, said that's the only way we'll get the power back to people from big corporations. Secondly, if we have government, NGOs, charitable foundations not able to solve our social problems, communities, all of that is great work, but we have problems that we can't solve, such as the one we've been discussing. My town is 800 plus people, tiny town. The last housing for seniors, the individuals who put in money lost money. The local hospital put in money, lost money. The city council is still paying on the last one. And we have people just leaving town because there's nowhere to live. I presented to the council this morning that everybody's in favor of housing, but you can't just get people to donate a few lots and get together some windows. We're talking about $1,600,000, even if you get lots of lots and $450,000 block grant with no match. You're still looking for someone to sign the bottom line who will carry the loan, and they've had bad experiences. Is there any way, the only way I can see is creating a social business, and that's under, it's a person, 2006 Nobel Peace Prize winner, Muhammad Yunus, came up with a social business idea where charitable funding would go into a business. There is no profit. They can get their money back, but after that, and it might go from one community to the next. something to look at for all you NGO people and VISTAs looking in that area. But this is one I haven't been able to figure out. I don't know how we can get it. We have a need. We can't solve it.
Thank you, Terry, for your comments. I think your point about Mohammed Yunus is great, and I think that's a great example of looking for unconventional assets. Is looking at obviously you're looking at a huge donation there, but there are microloan organizations that are popping up all over the country, and in addition, there is also Kickstarter and some of those crowdfunding campaigns that are starting to pop up as alternatives. So thank you for your comment, and we're going to go on to our next question. So our next question is, do you have tips on ABCD when you're not in one specific neighborhood? So how do you do what are some tips for doing asset mapping for an entire city or for an entire region versus one community? And Asma, maybe you can give a couple of tips since you've had experience with this.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because the program is statewide, we did want that statewide asset map, and it's something that can come in so useful once it's created, but the hard part is really creating it. I would say the first plus or the first advantage is that if you yourself are in that city, and that's where kind of the stories people part of that asset map come in if you look back to that pie chart we had created. And I would say the easiest thing to do is just to start beginning to talk to people, and especially if you're living in a city but you're not native, it's just to talk to people and get an idea of the resources. And once you go from point A to point B, like, okay, I've learned about this, and I go to this resource, I check it out, I write down the details, ask them for further information, and just to continue from one point to another by asking for advice and asking for suggestions, and doing that at every place you're led to.
This is Toria. If I could just add on, Asma, thank you. That was a wonderful response. And I'd just like to add on that even when you think that you have a very clear space, my school is in one particular neighborhood, and one of the decisions that I made early on is whether to use the neighborhood that the school is in or the entire catchment area. When I decided to use the entire catchment area, one of the strengths that I found was that there was a lot of resources that I didn't know about, even though I had been at my site for 7 or 8 months. And I found out about all these things that were not in the immediate neighborhood, but were in the neighborhood of children at the school. So the point to that is, as long as you have defined borders, whether it's, in Asma's case, the state, in my case, the catchment area for the school, or the city, in someone else's case maybe, it can be beneficial to have more of a space to work from. Of course, you're not necessarily going to get as in-depth with individuals within that, or as many individuals per space as you might if it was a smaller area. But I think that it's, in many ways, can be more of a benefit. And it's just, again, starting off with what you know, and then, asking everyone who else that you should talk to while you're doing this.
Great, thank you. And I think we're going to take one more question from the line.
At this time, there are no questions.
Okay, then we'll take one more question from the Q&A. So, one question is, although asset mapping is not necessarily geographic, is it still important to have some sort of visual map versus a list of assets at the end of the process?
This is Shannon again. I can take that. I think that it's certainly both helpful and engaging for yourself and also for the larger community to really have a visual so that they can start to see some of those connections and think about their community in a different way, and sort of shape, transition some of the mindset, especially if the community doesn't necessarily see some of those connections and what resources might be available. And so sometimes the visualization is the best way to uncover some of those hidden connections and find patterns that have emerged that might not be what you were expecting. and can kind of help you to think about how you're going to advance your project in a different way. And so I would certainly recommend that that you do find a visual representation to map out what those assets are and what those relationships are, so that you can see that to get the patterns, whether or not that's something that you do with using an existing map, or if you create one, or if you do something similar to the strategic connections chart that we showed earlier. I think that all of those are things that will help.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. There is an evaluation that is open right now, so make sure to take that before you leave the session today, so that we can have some feedback and figure out how we can improve these sessions going forward, and also what topics and what tips we should include on future webinars. At the end, I just want to thank you all for coming today. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us at vistawebinars@cns.gov. Our next webinar will be the intersection of poverty, race, and health, and that's with Dr. Blumenthal, who is the first MD to become a VISTA, so we're very excited to have him on the 17th. As always, the ongoing learning page on the VISTA campus has a complete schedule of our VISTA web shops and all of the recordings and PDFs of our presentations that we have done, so make sure to check there. We will be sending you a follow-up email afterwards with the slides, in addition to the great resources and tips that you've shared with us today. So thank you very much, and thank you all of our wonderful panelists.